This is the AWS Morning Brief Security Edition. AWS is fond of saying security is job zero. That means it's nobody in particular's job, which means it falls to the rest of us. Just the news you need to know, none of the fluff.
This episode is brought to you in part by Split Software. Split is the feature delivery platform you need to help you exceed modern expectations in continuous and progressive delivery. As they once said, if you're not first, you're last. Similarly, if you're not delivering, you're falling behind. A software release shouldn't be stressful, and yet they tend to happen late at night after many days of stress. Imagine if it were otherwise. No mishaps, headaches, or hair loss. Split is the feature data platform software engineers need to release features quickly and safely. You and up to 10 of your colleagues can create your first feature flags at split.io/AWS Morning Brief. That's split.io/AWS Morning Brief. Hello and welcome to Last Week in AWS Security Edition. Let's get into it. Tired of attempting to reach you about your car insurance? It appears that some folks have changed it up and instead sent the barrage of emails about an upcoming ACM certificate change. 98% of us will not have to change anything, but if you've implemented anything that depends upon a certain certificate chain, you're going to want to pay attention. Just check your email, voicemail, pigeon coops, etc. for details. Now let's see what happened last week in AWS security. Sometimes Tailscale sponsors my nonsense. Sometimes they're annoying and don't sponsor my nonsense. And honestly, I don't know which it is this week because I don't know who's sponsoring anything at the time that I write or record it. That said, they have a blog post of theirs titled What We Learned and Can Share from Passing Our SOC 2 Type 2 Audit is not something they have sponsored. And it's absolutely worth your time and attention to look at, even though they're not paying me to say anything about it. Here's why. SOC audits are challenging, and their experience report shines a light on a very poorly understood process that more and more of us are going through. I laud their transparency. When I was a SOC 2 control owner in a previous role, I had to figure it out by getting it wrong. I would have loved something like this to reference. In other news, it's apparently a compliance-themed week because I found a post that talks about the challenges of assessing Kubernetes clusters for PCI compliance. I have never tried to do that, and I can only imagine how annoying it must be. And you might have noticed in this show that I periodically endorse Oracle Cloud on 3 points. Their free tier absolutely does what it says and never charges you a penny. Their data transfer charges are a fraction of their competitors. And the technology is legitimately good. That last one is sort of under threat this week as our friends at Wiz discovered that you could mount other customers' EBS volumes simply by asking the API to do so. It's been almost a week since this dropped and I'm still screaming about it. I want OCI to compete with AWS and Google, not with Azure.
This episode is sponsored in part by our friends at Sysdig. Sysdig secures your cloud from source to run. They believe, as do I, that DevOps and security are inextricably linked. If you want to learn more about how they view this, check out their blog. It's definitely worth the read. To learn more about how they are absolutely getting it right from where I sit, visit sysdig.com and tell them that I sent you. That's SYSDIG.com. And my thanks to them for their continued support of this ridiculous nonsense.
AWS had an interesting announcement, specifically announcing an update to IAM role trust policy behavior. Now, this is a technical change that has an interesting blog post attached to it. They're talking about a theoretical misconfiguration scenario, discussing what's changing on their end and telling you why it's changing, and they managed to pull all of this off without setting off any of my "there's a vulnerability that they're not disclosing" alarm bells. All in all, this is very well messaged. And I want to point out that while excellent messaging from AWS is something of a rarity, the excellent security posture is very much par for the course. And the tool also comes from them this week. I like what they've done with their IAM roles anywhere release. And as a refresher, it lets you get an IAM role anywhere you have a certificate that's signed by your designated certificate authority. That said, this stuff is super finicky to get right. So AWS has launched its Roles Anywhere Credential Helper, which is a reference implementation that's going to help you get yours dialed in. And that's what happened last week in AWS security. Thanks for listening. I'm Corey Quinn. Stay salty, friends.
Thank you for listening to the AWS Morning Brief Security Edition. For the latest in AWS security that actually matters, please follow AWS Morning Brief on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever the hell it is you find the dulcet tones of my voice. And be sure to sign up for the Last Week in AWS newsletter at lastweekinaws.com.
This has been a Humble Pod production. Stay humble.